People like you always think the rules don't apply to you. The words cracked through the frozen air just seconds before the sound of the slap echoed across the self-checkout lanes. An apple rolled slowly across the white tile floor, bumping gently against a metal candy rack before settling beneath the fluorescent lights. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the cashier scanning frozen dinners in lane 6. Not the teenage employee bagging groceries beside the soda cooler. Not even the mother pushing a shopping cart with a crying toddler near the pharmacy aisle. Every eye in Brooksmart turned toward the old woman standing near self-checkout register 4. Evelyn Brooks adjusted her glasses carefully with trembling fingers, her thin silver bracelet catching the harsh overhead lighting for only a second before disappearing beneath the sleeve of her faded brown coat. She looked small standing there alone, no taller than 5'4", her shoulders slightly bent with age, her gray curls tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat the color of soft cream. A box of cold medicine rested beside a loaf of wheat bread near her feet. The younger white woman standing across from her wore a sharp red manager's blazer with a polished silver name tag that read Karen Whitmore, store manager. Her jaw was tight, her breathing sharp. One manicured finger pointed directly at Evelyn, like she was identifying a criminal in public. "I saw you slip it into your bag," Karen snapped loudly enough for half the store to hear. "And now you're pretending to be confused?" Evelyn blinked once. Slowly, calmly. The left side of her cheek had turned faintly pink beneath the cold store lighting, but her expression never hardened. She looked down at the small paper receipt resting near the scanner, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," Evelyn said softly, her voice steady despite the eyes surrounding her. "I paid for the medicine already." Karen laughed under her breath, short and cruel. "Sure you did." Nearby, an elderly Hispanic man lowered his shopping basket awkwardly and looked away. Two teenagers near the energy drinks aisle quietly pulled out their phones. A little girl wearing a yellow raincoat stared openly. From behind her mother's cart, confusion spreading across her face. Evelyn bent slowly at the knees, reaching for the bread that had fallen from her reusable shopping bag. Before she could pick it up, the little girl hurried over first and grabbed it carefully with both hands. "Here, ma'am," she whispered shyly. Evelyn looked at her with tired but gentle eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." The girl smiled faintly before rushing back to her mother. Karen folded her arms. "Don't play innocent with me," she said. "We've had problems like this before." The words hung ugly in the air. Heavy, deliberate. Evelyn's eyes drifted slowly across the store around her. The bright sale signs hanging from the ceiling. The humming refrigeration units near produce. The exhausted workers pretending not to listen. Something quiet passed through her expression then. Not anger. Something sadder. Like disappointment settling into old bones. She looked back at Karen and spoke so softly the entire store leaned into the silence just to hear her. "I prayed this company hadn't become this." Karen scoffed immediately. "Oh, spare me the speech." Then she turned sharply toward the security desk near customer service. "Call loss prevention," she barked. Now, across the store, a young black employee named Marcus Reed froze beside a cart stacked with bottled water. His grip tightened around the metal handle as he watched Evelyn standing alone beneath the cold white lights, still holding the loaf of bread gently against her chest like dignity was the only thing she had left to protect. Marcus swallowed hard as the voice over the intercom called for loss prevention to report to self-checkout immediately. The sound crackled through the ceiling speakers while shoppers pretended not to stare. Evelyn remained still beside the register, one weathered hand resting lightly on the handle of her shopping cart. Inside sat only a few simple things. A carton of eggs, canned soup, tea bags, a small bouquet of white carnations wrapped in thin plastic. Marcus noticed the flowers first. Fresh, carefully chosen, not the kind someone grabbed in a rush. Karen stepped closer, heels clicking sharply against the tile. "Do not move," she said coldly. "Security is on the way." Evelyn nodded once as if the words carried no surprise at all. "I was not planning to run," she replied quietly. Her calmness irritated Karen more than shouting ever could have. The younger woman crossed her arms tighter across her chest and glanced around the growing crowd with the stiff confidence of someone performing authority instead of possessing it. Near the bakery section, an older employee slowly lowered a tray of dinner rolls onto a rack, eyes filled with discomfort. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped in. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing every face pale beneath their glare. Marcus looked toward the customer service counter where two assistant managers whispered nervously beside a computer screen. Neither moved to help. Neither questioned Karen. That bothered him more than anything. Evelyn bent slightly and adjusted the sleeve of her coat. Marcus noticed how carefully she moved, not fragile exactly, but deliberate, like someone used to carrying pain without letting anyone see it. The carnations slipped sideways in the cart, and she fixed them gently before looking toward the front windows. Outside, dark clouds rolled low across the parking lot. Rain tapped softly against the glass doors now. Steady. Cold. Ma'am, Marcus said suddenly before fear could stop him. Every head turned toward him. Karen's eyes narrowed instantly. Marcus felt heat rise into his neck, but forced himself to continue. I think we should check the receipt before calling security. Silence. Sharp and immediate. Karen stared at him like he had crossed a line nobody else dared touch. Excuse me, she asked slowly. Marcus swallowed again. I just mean maybe there was a mistake at the scanner. Karen took 2 steps toward him. Are you questioning me in front of customers? No, ma'am. Then get back to work. Her voice sliced through the air. Marcus lowered his eyes for a second, but not before Evelyn noticed the shame flicker across his face. It reminded her of something old, something she had seen too many times before. Young people learning how silence keeps paychecks safe. Karen turned back toward Evelyn with forced patience stretched thin across her expression. You people always act offended when someone finally holds you accountable. A woman near the freezer aisle gasped softly under her breath. Marcus looked up immediately. Even the assistant managers stopped whispering. Evelyn's eyes rested on Karen quietly. Not angry, not afraid, just deeply tired. Do you know, Evelyn said softly, what hurts the most about moments like this? Karen rolled her eyes. Save it. But Evelyn continued anyway, her voice no louder than the rain against the windows. It is never the accusation. She glanced slowly around the store at the employees avoiding eye contact. It is watching decent people become silent because they are afraid of someone with a title. Marcus felt the words land directly in his chest. Karen laughed once without humor. This is exactly why stores lose money. Everybody wants to turn consequences into a lecture. Then the front door slid open. 2 security guards entered from the rain, black jackets damp at the shoulders, radios crackling softly at their hips. And for the first time since this began, the entire store felt colder. The taller security guard approached first, his boots leaving small rainwater prints across the polished floor. His name tag read Thompson. He looked from Karen to Evelyn, then briefly toward the crowd gathering near self-checkout. Years of working retail security had taught him how to recognize real danger. This did not feel like theft. It felt like humiliation wearing the uniform of procedure. What seems to be the issue? He asked carefully. Karen answered before anyone else could speak. She concealed unpaid merchandise and became disruptive when confronted. Evelyn remained silent beside her cart. Marcus noticed her fingers resting lightly on the handle, steady despite the tension pressing in from every side. Thompson glanced toward the receipt lying beside the scanner. Did we verify the transaction? Karen's jaw tightened immediately. I already handled it. The second guard shifted uncomfortably near the automatic doors. Outside, rain streaked across the parking lot in silver lines beneath the gray afternoon sky. Customers near the entrance had slowed to watch openly now. Some whispered. Others pretended to browse candy displays while listening to every word. Karen lowered her voice slightly, but not enough to hide the irritation dripping from it. Look, we cannot keep letting people walk all over store policy because they know how to play victim. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. There it was again. Not just suspicion. Something uglier hiding underneath it. Evelyn finally lifted her gaze toward Thompson. Young man, she said softly. Would you mind reading the receipt? Thompson hesitated only briefly before stepping toward the machine. Karen exhaled sharply through her nose. Seriously, she muttered. Thompson picked up the thin strip of paper and scanned it quickly beneath the white checkout lights. Bread, tea, soup, cold medicine. Paid in full 7 minutes earlier with a debit card ending in 1148. Silence spread across his expression almost instantly. Marcus saw the exact second realization hit him. Thompson looked slowly toward Karen. The items were purchased, he said quietly. Karen stared at him in disbelief. That cannot be right. Thompson handed her the receipt. It is. For a moment, the only sound came from the refrigeration units humming near frozen foods. Karen skimmed the paper quickly, color draining from her face before anger rushed back twice as fast. Well, maybe she scanned it after I approached her, she snapped. Either way, her behavior has been completely inappropriate. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. My behavior? Karen pointed toward the growing crowd. You caused a scene. Marcus almost spoke again, but stopped himself. Fear sat heavy in his stomach now. He needed this job. Rent was due in 4 days. His mother's insulin refill was already late. But standing there listening to Karen twist the truth into something ugly made his chest feel tight beneath his uniform shirt. Thompson cleared his throat carefully. Ma'am, if the merchandise was paid for, maybe we should just de-escalate and let the customer continue shopping. Karen's expression hardened instantly at the word customer. Not woman. Not suspect. Customer. It challenged the story she had already built in her head. Do not tell me how to manage my store, she said coldly. Thompson stepped back slightly. Around them, employees exchanged uneasy glances. One cashier quietly turned off her register light to stop more customers from entering the lane. Near produce, an older black janitor paused his mop bucket and watched from a distance with tired eyes that suggested this was not unfamiliar territory. Evelyn slowly reached into her coat pocket and removed a neatly folded handkerchief. She dabbed lightly beneath her glasses where rainwater from earlier still clung to the edge of her skin. Then she looked at Karen with a sadness so calm it almost felt unbearable. You keep calling this your store, Evelyn said softly. That is the problem. Karen frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Evelyn folded the handkerchief carefully between her fingers. A store stops belonging to the community the moment fear becomes more important than dignity. Karen laughed once under her breath, but it sounded thinner now, less certain. Then from somewhere beyond the front entrance came the low sound of engines pulling into the parking lot one after another. The sound outside grew louder by the second. Tires rolling slowly over wet asphalt. Car doors opening beneath the rain. Several customers near the entrance turned instinctively toward the glass windows. Marcus followed their gaze and saw 3 black SUVs pulling into the fire lane directly in front of the store. Their headlights reflected across the rain-soaked pavement in long silver streaks. Karen frowned immediately. What now? She muttered under her breath. Thompson stepped closer to the doors, curiosity replacing tension on his face. The automatic entrance slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, letting cold air sweep into the building. Rain drifted briefly across the tile floor before the doors shut again behind a group of sharply dressed men and women entering from outside. Dark coats, leather folders, polished shoes carrying tiny drops of water across the white floor. The energy inside the store changed instantly. One of the assistant managers near customer service straightened so fast he nearly knocked over a clipboard. Corporate, someone whispered near the bakery. Karen's posture shifted immediately. Her shoulders pulled back. Her expression tightened into the polished professionalism she reserved for upper management visits. Everybody back to work, she ordered quickly, smoothing the front of her blazer. But nobody moved, because the people entering were not looking at sale displays or inventory reports. They were walking directly toward self-checkout. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as the group approached. At the center walked a tall black man in his 40s wearing a charcoal overcoat over a navy suit. Calm eyes, controlled movements, the kind of presence that silenced rooms without effort. He stopped several feet from Evelyn and looked at her carefully, concern flashing across his face the instant he noticed the redness lingering beneath her glasses. Mrs. Brooks, he said quietly, are you all right? The entire store seemed to stop breathing. Karen blinked once, then twice. Excuse me, she asked uncertainly. The man ignored her completely at first. His attention remained on Evelyn. I came as soon as I got the call, he continued. Evelyn offered him a small tired smile. You drove too fast in this weather again, Daniel. A faint breath of relieved laughter escaped him. Probably. Marcus stared openly now. Mrs. Brooks. Not ma'am. Not customer. Not suspect. Mrs. Brooks. The assistant managers exchanged alarmed looks near customer service. One of them visibly paled. Daniel finally turned toward Karen. His expression remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. Who is the acting store manager here? Karen stepped forward automatically. I am Karen Whitmore. Daniel nodded once. Daniel Brooks, Senior Corporate Counsel. Karen's confidence flickered. Only slightly. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, she began quickly. Your employee accused Mrs. Brooks of theft after she had already paid for her items. Thompson interrupted carefully before she could reshape the story again. Karen shot him a sharp look. Daniel's eyes moved slowly from Thompson to the receipt, still resting near the scanner. Then to Evelyn standing quietly beside the cart, holding white carnations. Rainwater still glistened faintly on the shoulders of her coat. I see, he said softly. One of the executives behind him leaned toward another and whispered something Marcus could not hear. But he saw the shock on their faces clearly now. Karen forced a stiff smile. If we made an error, of course we apologize and will resolve the situation appropriately. Evelyn looked at her gently. Karen, she said softly, you still believe this is about a mistake? Karen opened her mouth, but no words came immediately. Around them, employees stood frozen beneath the humming fluorescent lights. Customers pretended to shop while openly staring now. Somewhere near frozen foods, a jar slipped from someone's hand and shattered softly against the floor, but nobody turned toward the sound. Daniel stepped beside Evelyn quietly. The board is already aware of the incident, he said. Security footage was forwarded 12 minutes ago. Karen's face lost what little color remained. Footage? She repeated weakly. Daniel nodded once. Every word, every action. Silence spread through the store like cold water. Then Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes toward the giant Brooksmart logo hanging above the registers, and for the first time since entering the store, disappointment finally outweighed sadness in her face. Karen's mouth opened once, then closed again without sound. The fluorescent lights above self-checkout suddenly seemed too bright, exposing every nervous twitch in her face. One of the assistant managers quietly stepped backward toward customer service, as if distance alone could separate him from what was unfolding. Daniel removed a pair of black leather gloves slowly, his movements calm and controlled. Mrs. Brooks requested that I review this location personally next month, he said evenly. I did not expect the review to begin in the parking lot. Karen forced out a strained laugh. Sir, with all respect, this situation has clearly been misunderstood. Has it? Daniel asked softly. He turned slightly toward Thompson. Did Mrs. Brooks threaten anyone? No, sir. Did she raise her voice? No, sir. Daniel nodded once. Was the merchandise paid for? Before confrontation, Thompson answered immediately this time. Yes, sir. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Rain continued tapping softly against the tall front windows while customers stood frozen between shopping carts and checkout lanes. Somewhere near aisle 9, a baby began crying faintly before being wheeled away by embarrassed parents. Karen straightened her blazer again, but her hands trembled now. I was only following loss prevention protocol. Evelyn finally looked directly at her. No, she said quietly. You were following assumptions. Karen's jaw tightened. I treat everyone the same. Marcus lowered his eyes the instant he heard that sentence. Not because he believed it, because he had heard it before. Evelyn noticed him immediately. She noticed the exhaustion in the shoulders of the janitor near frozen foods too. The fear in the cashiers pretending to organize receipts while listening. The way employees watched Karen instead of the truth, measuring survival with every expression. Evelyn let out a slow breath. That sentence, she said softly, has hidden a great deal of cruelty in this country. Nobody moved. Daniel reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed a thin black tablet. With 2 taps, security footage appeared across the screen. Karen saw herself standing over Evelyn beneath the self-checkout lights. Saw the accusation. Saw the receipt already printed beside the machine. Saw Marcus trying to intervene. Saw customers staring in discomfort while nobody stepped forward. Daniel held the screen silently for several seconds before lowering it again. This footage was transmitted automatically to regional oversight after customer complaints were submitted through the mobile app, he explained calmly. Karen blinked rapidly. Complaints. 7 in under 8 minutes. Her face drained pale again. One of the executives behind Daniel quietly whispered, My God. Evelyn rested her hand lightly against the shopping cart handle. Do you know why I still visit stores personally? She asked softly. Nobody answered. Because numbers lie less than people do. Her eyes moved slowly across the employees gathered nearby. Spreadsheets. Can tell me profits. But they cannot tell me when dignity disappears from a building. Marcus felt something tighten painfully in his throat. Karen looked around desperately now, searching for support that no longer existed. Even the assistant managers avoided eye contact. Mrs. Brooks, she began weakly. If there is anything I can do to correct this, you already had that chance, Evelyn interrupted gently. Her voice never rose. That somehow made every word heavier. Karen swallowed hard. Please. Daniel glanced toward the executives beside him. Effective immediately, he said calmly. All management personnel assigned to this location are suspended pending full review. One of the assistant managers physically stumbled backward against the customer service counter. Karen stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. Daniel looked at her without emotion. Mrs. Brooks founded this company 52 years ago with 1 store and 6 employees. Her standards are not optional. Karen turned sharply toward Evelyn then, truly seeing her for the first time. Not the worn coat. Not the gray curls. Not the old shopping cart. The woman beneath all of it. The woman whose name sat above every automatic door in the building. Evelyn met her eyes quietly. You stopped seeing people the moment you started seeing categories, she said softly. And for the first time since this began, Karen Whitmore looked afraid not of losing her job, but of realizing exactly who she had become. No one in the store spoke after that. The silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. Karen stood motionless beneath the fluorescent lights, her face pale, one hand still gripping the edge of the checkout counter as though it were the only solid thing left in the room. The assistant managers near customer service looked hollow now, their earlier confidence drained away beneath the cold white glow hanging from the ceiling. Rain pressed steadily against the front windows in soft rhythmic taps. Evelyn looked around the store slowly. She noticed things most people missed. The tired cashier rubbing her wrist after a long shift. The janitor quietly pushing shattered glass into a dustpan near aisle 9. The young mother bouncing her sleepy toddler while pretending not to stare. 52 years earlier, she had stood inside a tiny grocery store on the south side of Chicago holding a mop in one hand and a ledger book in the other, dreaming that one day ordinary people could shop somewhere that treated them with dignity no matter how much money sat in their bank account or what color their skin happened to be. Looking at this store now, she felt that dream slipping through her fingers. Daniel stepped closer beside her. Mrs. Brooks, he said quietly, we can continue this privately if you prefer. Evelyn shook her head once. No. Her voice remained gentle, but there was weight behind it now. People watched this happen publicly. They deserved to hear the truth publicly too. Marcus felt his chest tighten again. He stood near the bottled water display with his hands clasped tightly in front of him, unsure whether he should stay or disappear. Evelyn noticed him immediately. What is your name again? She asked softly. He blinked in surprise. Marcus Reed, ma'am. How long have you worked here, Marcus? Almost 3 years. Evelyn nodded slowly. And how many times have you watched people stay quiet because they were afraid? The question hit him harder than he expected. He lowered his eyes toward the floor tiles. Too many times, he admitted quietly. Nobody interrupted him. Not even Karen. The humming refrigeration units near frozen foods filled the silence between breaths. Evelyn folded her handkerchief carefully in her hands. Fear spreads quietly, she said. 1 person abuses power. 10 people stay silent to protect themselves. Eventually, everyone forgets what kindness is supposed to look like. Her eyes drifted toward the Brooksmart logo hanging high above the checkout lanes. And then a company loses its soul long before it loses money. One of the executives behind Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Karen finally found her voice again, though it sounded smaller now. I never meant for any of this to happen. Evelyn looked at her without anger. That is the tragedy of it. Karen swallowed hard. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes now, though she fought them back immediately. I thought I was protecting the store. No, Evelyn replied softly. You were protecting your assumptions. Outside, thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the parking lot. Customers slowly began returning to their carts, but the energy inside the building remained fragile, like thin glass after a crack. The little girl in the yellow raincoat still stood near the candy display, holding her mother's hand. Evelyn smiled gently at her. The child smiled back immediately. Such a small moment. So simple. Yet Marcus realized that was what made Evelyn different from everyone else in the room. Even after humiliation, even after accusation, She still saw people individually instead of categories. Daniel glanced toward his watch before leaning closer. "The regional board members are waiting in the conference room," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded faintly, but did not move yet. Instead, she reached into her shopping cart and picked up the bouquet of white carnations. One flower had bent slightly during the chaos. She adjusted it gently with careful fingers. Marcus noticed then that her hands were trembling from age and exhaustion, not anger. Somehow that hurt more to witness. Evelyn looked back toward Karen one final time. "I hope one day," she said softly, "you understand that authority means very little if people feel smaller after standing beside you." And beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the store that carried her name, Karen Whitmore lowered her eyes for the very first time. The conference room overlooked the rain-soaked parking lot through a wall of tall glass windows streaked with water. Gray afternoon lights spilled across the polished oak table where regional executives sat unusually silent, folders unopened in front of them. Nobody reached for coffee. Nobody checked their phones. The atmosphere carried the weight of a funeral more than a meeting. Evelyn entered slowly beside Daniel, still holding the bouquet of white carnations against her coat. Marcus followed several steps behind after Daniel personally asked him to attend. The young employee looked deeply uncomfortable walking into a room usually reserved for people whose salaries felt larger than his entire life. Karen entered last. Her red manager blazer no longer looked sharp beneath the cold lighting. It looked heavy, wrinkled, like authority collapsing under its own reflection. Daniel pulled out a chair gently for Evelyn at the head of the table. Every executive stood automatically the moment she approached. Marcus noticed Karen hesitate before slowly doing the same. Evelyn lowered herself carefully into the chair with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent decades carrying burdens without asking anyone to notice. The room settled into silence again once everyone sat. Rain rolled softly down the windows behind them. Daniel opened a thin folder and slid several printed reports across the table. "Over the last 18 months, he said calmly, "this location has generated the third highest customer complaint rate in the district involving discriminatory treatment allegations." Karen's head snapped upward immediately. "That is not fair," she said quickly. "Most of those complaints were never substantiated." Daniel looked at her evenly. "Most were never investigated. Nobody challenged him." Marcus stared down at the polished wood table, feeling something painful unfold in his chest. Because suddenly moments he had forced himself to ignore began lining up clearly in his memory. Elderly customers followed through aisles. Spanish-speaking shoppers treated with suspicion. Black teenagers watched more closely than others near electronics. Little things. Quiet things. The kind that slowly taught people they were unwelcome without anyone ever saying the words directly. Evelyn rested her fingertips lightly against the carnations. "When I opened the first Brooks Mart in 1974, she said softly, banks refused to lend me money because I was a black woman." The room remained perfectly still. "A supplier once told me customers would never trust groceries from someone who looked like me." Karen lowered her eyes slowly. Evelyn continued quietly, not with anger, but with the exhaustion of old memory. "So I built stores where people could walk through the doors without being humiliated for existing." Her gaze lifted toward the executives around the table. "Do you know what the first slogan for this company was?" Nobody answered. "Everybody deserves dignity." The words hung in the room heavier than any corporate presentation ever could. Marcus felt goosebumps rise along his arms. Daniel slid another report across the table. "Employee retention at this location has also dropped 40% under current management." One executive exhaled sharply under his breath. Karen finally spoke again, though her voice sounded fragile now. "I was trying to maintain order." Evelyn looked at her gently. "Order without compassion becomes cruelty very quickly." Karen's eyes filled with tears she could no longer fully hide. "I never hated anyone." Evelyn nodded faintly. "Hatred is loud. What concerns me more is indifference." Thunder rolled faintly beyond the windows again. Marcus glanced outside and watched rainwater running along the curbs beneath the dark sky. The world beyond the glass continued moving while inside the room something deeper was breaking apart. Daniel closed the folder carefully. "Effective immediately," he announced calmly. "All current management personnel at this location are terminated pending formal review by the Ethics Board." The words landed softly but permanently. Karen inhaled sharply like the air had left the room entirely. One assistant manager buried his face in his hands. Another stared blankly at the table. Nobody argued. Nobody protested. Because somewhere deep down, they already knew this meeting had started long before today. It started every time silence protected humiliation instead of humanity. Evelyn looked toward Marcus then. "You spoke up when fear would have been easier," she said quietly. Marcus blinked in shock. "I almost did not." "But you did," Evelyn replied. And for the first time that entire day, Marcus felt seen not as an employee number or a uniform standing near bottled water, but as a human being. The meeting ended without celebration. No applause. No raised voices. Just the soft sound of chairs sliding back across polished floors and rain continuing to fall beyond the tall glass windows. One by one, the executives gathered their folders and stepped quietly from the conference room, leaving behind an atmosphere that felt less like punishment and more like reckoning. Marcus remained near the doorway, uncertain whether he should leave too. Karen still sat at the far end of the table, shoulders lowered now, staring blankly at her folded hands. The red blazer that once made her seem untouchable suddenly looked painfully ordinary. Daniel closed the final report and placed it carefully into his leather folder before stepping outside to take a phone call. That left only Evelyn, Marcus, and Karen inside the room. Silence settled heavily between them. Evelyn slowly rose from her chair, one hand resting briefly against the edge of the table for support. Age showed itself more openly now in the quiet aftermath. Marcus instinctively moved forward. "Do you need help, ma'am?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Thank you, Marcus. I am all right." Karen looked up at that, at the kindness still present in Evelyn's voice after everything that had happened. Her lips trembled slightly before she finally spoke. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question sounded small, fragile. Evelyn adjusted the bouquet of carnations in her hands before answering. "Because humiliation does not heal humiliation." Karen's eyes filled again. "I do not understand how I became this person." The rain against the windows softened into a gentle, steady rhythm. Evelyn studied her quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "Most people do not wake up intending to lose their compassion," she said softly. "It happens slowly, one assumption at a time, one ignored moment at a time, one silence at a time." Karen lowered her face into her hands briefly. "I thought being tough meant being respected." "No," Evelyn replied gently. "Fear and respect are very different things." Marcus stood motionless near the door, listening carefully. Every word felt less like a lecture and more like someone placing truth carefully onto a table where nobody could avoid seeing it anymore. Karen wiped beneath her eyes quickly, embarrassed by her own emotion. "I ruined my career today." Evelyn shook her head faintly. "Your career can recover." Karen looked up slowly. "Then what cannot?" Evelyn's expression softened with sadness. "The people you taught to feel smaller." The room fell silent again. Somewhere outside the conference room, shopping carts rattled faintly across tile as the store slowly returned to normal operations. Life moving forward while something deeper remained changed forever. Evelyn walked slowly toward the doorway, then paused beside Marcus. "How old are you?" she asked quietly. 26, ma'am." "And what did you study?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Business administration. Community college mostly at night." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "You notice people." Marcus looked confused. "Ma'am, that matters more than most executives realize." Daniel stepped back into the room then, rainwater still glistening faintly across the shoulders of his coat. "The press has already started calling," he said quietly. Evelyn sighed softly. "Of course they have." Daniel glanced toward Marcus. "Human Resources will contact you tomorrow morning regarding your promotion interview." Marcus stared at him. "My what?" Daniel smiled faintly for the first time all day. "Mrs. Brooks requested that ethical leadership candidates be reviewed immediately." Marcus looked speechless. Evelyn simply adjusted the carnations again. "A company survives because of people willing to protect dignity when it is inconvenient," she said softly. Karen watched that exchange in complete silence. Not jealousy anymore. Something more painful than that. Recognition. She had spent years chasing authority while overlooking the exact quality that made leadership worth following in the first place. Evelyn turned back toward her one final time before leaving. "I truly hope this day changes you," she said gently. Not because you lost power, because you finally saw what power without humanity becomes. Then she stepped quietly from the room beneath the cold fluorescent lights, leaving behind nothing but the soft scent of rain and white carnations in the silence she carried with her. The rain had stopped by sunrise. Thin streams of water still clung to the edges of the Brooksmart windows, catching the pale gold morning light as employees quietly prepared the store for opening. The air inside smelled faintly of floor cleaner, fresh bread from the bakery ovens, and brewed coffee drifting from the small cafe near produce. Everything looked the same at first glance. The polished floors, the glowing aisle signs, the shopping carts lined neatly beside the entrance. But Marcus felt the difference immediately the moment he stepped through the automatic doors wearing a freshly pressed blue button-down shirt instead of his usual stockroom uniform. People looked at him differently now. Not with fear, not with pity, with respect. The sensation still felt unfamiliar against his skin. Near customer service, a maintenance worker adjusted a brand new sign mounted carefully against the wall. Brooksmart Community Integrity Office. Marcus stopped walking for a second when he saw it. Beneath the title sat a smaller silver plaque. Marcus Reed. He stared at the letters quietly while morning sunlight stretched across the polished floor beneath his shoes. Daniel approached from behind, carrying 2 coffees. "You are here early," he said calmly. Marcus let out a nervous breath. "I barely slept." Daniel handed him one of the cups. "That means you understand responsibility." Employees moved quietly around them preparing registers and stocking shelves before opening. But something subtle had changed in the atmosphere. Cashiers greeted janitors by name. Managers actually made eye contact when speaking to workers. Small things. Human things. The kind most corporations forgot mattered. Marcus glanced toward the front entrance. "Do you think people can really change?" he asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the windows for a moment before answering. "Sometimes shame hardens people." He took a slow sip of coffee. "And sometimes it wakes them up." Across the parking lot, a city bus hissed to a stop beneath the clearing sky. A few customers stepped out carrying umbrellas and reusable grocery bags. Life continuing forward one ordinary morning at a time. Marcus noticed movement near aisle 3 then. Evelyn Brooks stood beside the canned soup section wearing the same faded brown coat from the day before. The white carnations rested in the child seat of her shopping cart, now beside a loaf of bread and a small bag of apples. No cameras followed her. No executives surrounded her. She moved quietly through the store like any other elderly customer doing morning shopping. Yet the entire atmosphere softened around her presence. Employees greeted her gently as she passed. Not because they feared her title, because they finally understood who she was. Marcus walked toward her carefully. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks." Evelyn turned with a warm smile behind her glasses. "Good morning, Marcus." He glanced toward the carnations. "Who are the flowers for?" Evelyn looked down at them softly. "My husband." Marcus nodded quietly. "You visit him every Friday?" "Every Friday for 21 years. There was no sadness in her voice. Only love that had learned how to survive absence. A few feet away, an elderly white woman struggled reaching a can from the top shelf. Before Marcus could react, Evelyn stepped forward first and gently lowered the item into the woman's cart with both careful hands. "There you go, sweetheart," she said kindly. The woman smiled gratefully without recognizing who stood beside her. Just 2 older strangers sharing a quiet human moment beneath fluorescent lights. Marcus watched Evelyn carefully then. This woman could have returned with anger, with lawsuits, with revenge. Instead, she came back carrying flowers and kindness into the very place that had humiliated her less than 24 hours earlier. That was when he finally understood what made her powerful. Not the company, not the money, not the authority sitting behind her name. It was the fact that cruelty had never convinced her to become cruel in return. Sunlight spilled brighter through the front windows now, warming the polished floors in long golden reflections. Evelyn picked up her shopping basket gently and continued down the aisle at an unhurried pace while employees and customers moved quietly around her. No speeches followed her. No applause. Just the soft sound of shopping carts rolling across tile and the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent her entire life teaching people that humanity mattered more than power ever would.